Hello and welcome to Hair in the Hawthorn. My name's Kate Ray and we come to you, that's Neil and I, with a Yuletime, Christmas, Hanukkah, holiday, however you want to say it, seasonal show where we're going to be talking everything from why is there a fairy on top of the Christmas tree to was Santa a shaman? This is where we're going to go. We've got no real plan for this. We're just going to throw around some ideas and some hypotheses, things that we've come across. So, a question that I've been recently asked, and one that I want to throw out to Neil to start off with, is what's Christmas got to do with the fairies? Massive question, mind blowingly massive question. Where do we start with that, Neil? Hello, by the way.
Hello, Kate. Yeah, thanks for throwing that one at me. The fairies. Well, it obviously, as we always talk about on this channel, it depends how you define a fairy. Um, and the most obvious connection that I can think of off the top of my head in most people's modern conception of Christmas and the traditions that go along with the modern Christmas are, of course, Santa's elves.
Mm-hmm.
So, why does Santa have elves? How have they become incorporated into Christmas?
Well, I can answer that one for you. How could he possibly make all those toys on his own? Seriously, Neil. You know?
Well, when we well, as you say, we're free forming this. So
We are.
this is quite kind of a nice segue
Mhm.
into talking about. Let's talk about Santa.
Yes, let's start with Santa because I mean, I've come across the theory quite recently, and it's one that when it was kind of thrown up in my direction, I just thought, I kind of know that, but I've never really kind of put it together, constructed it really. The fact that Santa is part of Fae, Santa is a
Yeah.
fairy, and he comes from a mythological base, but there are also very, very clear origins to how he developed the way he developed. So let's have a chat about some of those because you've done a little bit of research recently, haven't you, about Santa and the origins?
Yeah, well, not so recently actually. Two Christmases ago, I wrote a piece for the magazine called Ancient Origins that I've written quite a few pieces for over the years, and I decided to let me get the title of this right so that people can go and look at it if they would so wish. Siberian Shamanism, Fly
Yes.
Agaric, and the Origins of Santa Claus.
It couldn't be more up my street, this, definitely.
Well, talking to you about fly agaric, I just feel like saying, right, over to you, Kate. You can talk about fly agaric. But before you do, I have to say, I'm not claiming any kind of originality of thought on my part for this, because this is something that has developed over the last few years, and it's almost become a bit of a trope, not a cliche,
Mhm.
but lots of people have written about this. And my piece was trying to pull together some of what they were saying, some of my own thoughts on, whether it's a possibility or not, whether Santa was originally a Siberian shaman.
Mm.
Come to some of the details of that in a moment. Like I say, it's not my idea. It's not an original idea. And I find just before Christmas now, every year, someone else comes up with the same story. And
Yes.
some of them are well written and some of them are not so well written,
Mhm.
I have to say. And of course, there's the usual backlash against that,
Mhm.
with people saying, no, it's just a complete coincidence. What are you talking about? This is absolutely ridiculous. But I don't think it is ridiculous. As far as I can tell, the first person who made the connection specifically, uh, made the specific connection between Siberian shamanism and Santa Claus was the anthropologist called Mircea Eliade,
Mhm.
who in the 1950, I want to say 1952, early 1950s, wrote the book Shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy. And
Mhm.
if anyone wants to find out about shamanism, don't know where to start, that's where you start. It's a fantastic book, very big doorstep book, but Mircea Eliade really knew what they were doing, and takes in a global perspective on shamanism, how it developed, and how it has informed modern religions and modern thoughts. Anyway, he very briefly is a couple of sentences saying, oh, perhaps shamanism informed our modern view of Santa Claus.
Hmm.
And I think he was right.
Yes.
Now, in the article, I'm not going to obviously I'm not going to read out everything I said in the article. It's about 2,000-word article. You can go and find it if you want some more details. But basically, I came up with 8 reasons why there could be a connection between Santa and Siberian shamans. So do you want me to quickly run through?
Yes, please do. And just before you do start that, I mean, it was definitely something. I recently did an article for Haunted Magazine on similar lines, but was looking into specifically fly agaric, but mushrooms and their connection with the paranormal. And I came across this theory as well about shamanism and Santa. So yeah, please do go through them. It'd be interesting to see if we kind of picked up on. I'm sure we did on the same elements that pointed in that direction.
Okay, so when I'm talking just as a pointer, when I'm talking about Siberian shamanism, in this case, I'm talking specifically about what are called the Tungusic people. I'm
Yeah.
probably mispronouncing that. Sometimes known as the Evenke tribe in Siberia, who have been around for hundreds of years, and these are where these traditions come from. So the 8 points that link specifically Santa to Siberian shamanism. And it all comes down to the Amanita muscaria fly agaric mushroom. That's the main sort of link that we're looking at.
Mhm.
So first one, the simple one, is the red and white color.
Yes.
Though the Evenki shamans dressed in dyed pelts, dyed red and white. You can, it's easily searchable on the internet. That you can
Yes.
see how they dress. So that's that's a pretty close match to the iconography of Santa. But I'm going to read out point 2 straight from the article, if you don't mind, because I think
Please
this
do.
is a really important. So what I said in the article, number 2 connection. An important tradition among the Evenki was for the shaman to collect the fly agaric mushrooms in a sack during their growing seasons, and then to enter the smoke holes, the chimneys, of the yurts of the community to deliver the presents.
Hmm.
From late autumn, the smoke holes at the apex of the yurts were usually the only ingress and egress due to the build-up of snow. The fly agaric presents were then dried in the yurts, thereby, to reduce the toxins,
Hmm.
in readiness for later consumption by the shaman. The real present being the gift of knowledge that would be evinced by the shaman and then promulgated to the community. So you're always, the whole thing about Santa coming down the chimney. Why does he come down the chimney? It's ridiculous.
Hmm.
Uh, this is something that the shamans really did in
Yes.
Siberia, and that connection, I think, is pretty tight. Number 3, so when you one of the characteristics of ingesting fly agaric mushrooms is, if you do it at the right level and the right dosage, is a sense of flight.
Yes.
And basically, when a shaman would take it, their consciousness would be disassociated from their body.
Hmm.
And that altered state of consciousness would allow them to go to another world and bring back information. So there we have the connection of flight.
Yep.
Santa flying in the sky and delivering these presents, which segues into number 4. The Siberian peoples were obviously reliant on their herds of reindeer, but they're also the spirit animals of
Mm.
the shamans. And the ubiquity of reindeer in Siberian life may be the reason why why is Santa's sleigh carried by reindeer? Where could that tradition possibly have come from?
Yep.
Um, number 5, bringing in the green at Christmas, pagan concept
Yep.
utilized by Christianity as we'll talk about in a moment, as basically at the shortest day of the year, as a symbolic of life triumphing over death. Now, pine trees in Siberia is where the fly agaric grow. They grow underneath the the pine trees. So the bringing in of a pine tree into your house and decorating it, often with red and white presents and baubles. Could that be a correlation between, the connection between bringing in the pine tree and the fly agaric mushrooms? Maybe. And that goes on to number 6, where the felled pine tree to the yurt, it was brought into the yurt, was like a common practice amongst the Evenki, representing the cosmology of the 3 worlds, the lower, middle, and upper worlds, and
Yeah,
the tree world connecting them. That's that's another reason for them bringing in the trees. And coming back, number 7 comes back to your very original question of are Santa's elves represented? What are they representing? Well, maybe they're representing the Evenki nature spirits, which were an incredibly important component of their shamanistic practices. The shaman would often experience entities.
yes.
The name for them given by the Evenki is the Burakan.
Mm-hmm.
And so are they correspondent with our, concept of Santa's elvish helpers? Are they the nature spirits? It's just another speculation.
Definitely.
And finally, so no, point 8. This is the other issue. I'll just read this one straight out because again, it's probably quite important. Although Siberia is evidently not the North Pole, any dissemination of a Siberian shamanic concept of Santa could easily end up located in the home of Santa to a vaguely northern locale with Arctic conditions. So the modern idea of Santa's residence being in the North Pole may be simply a reference to his origination in a peripheral region associated with Arctic conditions. So there's a lot more to say on that, but those, I just want to get, those are basically the 8 points which allow people, so since Mircea Eliade wrote in the 1950s, that have allowed people to say there's a definite possibility of a
Yes.
connection with those 2 things. And I think that's, it's not, definitely not conclusive evidence. And there are other things. Maybe we can just talk about, some of the other originations of
Yeah, yeah.
Santa if we have time, but more modern origination mythology. But that's something for people to chew on. And if you've never come across this idea, your first thought is probably, no, that's absolute nonsense. That can't possibly be true. How can the how can those Siberian shamans and their practices going back hundreds of years up to the modern day, how can they have become assimilated
And filtered
into
down.
into a 19th and 20th century idea of Santa? But well, maybe I'll talk about that in a moment. But I've been talking about fly agaric, Amanita muscaria, for about 5 or 6 minutes now, and as far as I'm concerned, you know about 5 million times more about this than me. So over to you.
I genuinely don't. I genuinely have. I do. For anybody who knows me, I have a love for mushrooms. The mushrooms have taken over my life. I'm an artist and creator, and they have taken over my life. And for many reasons, it's one of the things that I find interesting when you say about how has such a fringe tribe of people in modern terms infiltrated Western culture and Europe so heavily, and the ideology of it so terribly. And I'm going to put it out there as just an hypothesis about when you have cultures of people who cannot be persuaded into a certain way of life or indoctrination, whether that be religious or political, then to envelop their sense of culture and being into your own. For instance, it could be that these people could not be converted into Christianity, and one of the ways to coax people over into Christianity was to say, look, we have this being too. We, this guy wearing a red suit, etc. Come over to us. And whether or not they're coaxed or not, I know that we have, and I know that's a very simple way of seeing it. I think before the whole fly agaric shamanic bubble came along into the idea of Christmas. So I gave up the Christian Christmas well over a decade ago, well over a decade ago. And I felt like I had to justify that to a lot of people about why I was doing it. And the more I found out about the pagan origins and the true origins for me as a British person, and how that important that was, and how much more that meant to me than the Christian aspect. And one of the things that I came across time and time again that didn't sit quite as nicely as the shamanic fly agaric side of it was the modern Santa that we see in red and white is from Coca-Cola. And I understand why that mythology kind of got entwined with it, because there's this whole theory that that Santa Claus is based on the Holly King or the Oak King. That we have that solstice fight for light that goes off on winter solstice. So we had this bearded man, lovely ruddy cheeks, etc., etc. And then Coca-Cola took that image but wanted it in its own branding colours, so rebranded it. And I know that was something that was floated about quite a lot. And I'm not saying that Coca-Cola didn't promote that singular image. Prior to that, Santa was possibly seen more in green than in reds within this country. So how far that filtered down in terms of the shamanic fly agaric theory and was met with Western culture and ideas, it's just such a lovely melting pot of different clashes of cultures, isn't it?
I think that's the point. It is a melting pot, and I'm not saying that. I don't think anybody is really saying that shamanic culture of using fly agaric mushrooms for altered state of consciousness just suddenly came into Western Europe and then the Americas in a direct way. Just going back to Coca-Cola, that they did first use, they probably are responsible for our modern image of the ruddy cheek, big grey beard, red and white costume when they put out their marketing campaign in 1931.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm right as saying that in 1931, Coca-Cola still included the recipe which included
Cocaine.
cocaine.
Yeah.
Which is interesting as well. That relation of altered state of consciousness
Mm-hmm.
between Coca-Cola, which we now think of as a sort of benign sugary drink, but the but you can take even if you leave the Siberian shamanism aspect apart, you can take this back to the beginning of the 19th century. And the writer Washington Irving, very famous writer, Sleepy Hollow is his probably most
Yes.
famous story. And in 1812, he wrote something called A History of New York. And in that, he was using the cultural traditions of Dutch settlers in the United States who celebrated St. Nicholas's Day
Yes.
on 6th of December. And St. Nicholas was an early 4th century bishop in Myra in Turkey. And if you look at images, medieval images of St. Nicholas, yeah, he's got a big white beard. There's no red and white there. But you can see how that has informed the mythos as well. And in Washington Irving's story, there's a dream sequence,
Mm-hmm.
and St. Nicholas flies in the air without reindeer and delivers presents as to the people of New York, which was based on that Dutch cultural tradition of St. Nicholas, who was known for giving secret gifts.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a sort of that's that's the story that most people can get on board with. Oh well, that's how it came about. But where's where are all of those things? Those 8 points that I talked about. The red and white,
Yeah.
the coming down the chimney, the pine tree. All of these aspects of the story, which seem much more ancient to me. There's just a feeling of ancientness about it, and as you say, a feeling of fairy about
Yeah.
it. Santa as a fairy of sorts. Um, and so I think, as writing on another subject of witchcraft, for instance, the cultural historians Carlo Ginzburg and Emma Wilby, who have written very well and brilliantly researched books about how shamanism not only survived in Christian Europe in the underground with people like witches and cunning folk, but was also informed by Eurasian traditions,
Hmm.
Siberian amongst them.
Hmm.
And if that could happen to something like witchcraft and underground paganism in Christian Europe, why couldn't a specific tradition of this red and white gift giving, altered state of consciousness, flying reindeer Santa, why could that not infiltrate as well? And then suddenly manifest at a later date in the 19th century. Should just be said that although we're talking about Coca-Cola and Washington Irving describing, Washington Irving describes a kind of Santa, and then Coca-Cola kind of
Yeah.
codify it in 1931, you can find many 19th century, mostly sort of later half of the 19th century, of images of gnomes
Yes. Yeah.
with often on Christmas cards and such like, often associated with midwinter,
Yes.
carrying or eating or delivering fly agaric
Mushrooms.
mushrooms.
Yeah.
Just search online. Usually German for some reason. Search German Christmas card gnome. You could even add fly agaric, and you'll get a ton of images. And these gnomes again bear a very close resemblance to Santa. And so they may be another part of the mix, which is just, it's been bubbling down underground for hundreds of years. And then suddenly, for reasons unknown, it's suddenly come to the surface, and we get this connection with this mind-altering um, mushroom with the magical parts of Santa Claus and the story. That's so, all of this is to think about. It's complex. It's a complex story, and anyone who says I've got the answer, this is where it came from, you probably should take that with a pinch of salt.
It's such an abstract tapestry, isn't it? And I mean, when I think about Santa's elves, and especially the ones that we're introduced to as children, they are more gnome-like. I mean, often they
Yeah,
don't sport the beards, but they have the conical hats. They are very small beings, and actually, when you look into elves as a more serious, if you like, race of ethereal beings, they aren't described a lot of the time mythologically as we see them with Santa. I mean, one of the things that I think is interesting that comes about with the gnomes and the fly agaric, and especially how we do see that resurgence of the connection between gnomes and fly agarics and winter and Christmas is in wintertime. Fly agarics are one of the very few things that we see in the snow that are edible. And please don't go out and eat them, but do your research. They are edible and not just for shamanic purposes. So people would have foraged for them to add to stews, etc. They knew how to process them so that they were perfectly edible. And they would have thanked the spirits of the earth. Now, when you're talking about mushrooms and mycelia, so the fruiting body of the mycelia is the mushroom, it's not the whole network, people would have very clearly understood that the mycelia, I mean, literally, the mycelia network can quite easily go 3 miles down from underneath your feet. So they are in the depths of the earth, which is where people would have associated gnomes living. So that connection between the gnomes, I mean, I have this image, and I know it's really silly, but when the rain comes, all the gnomes collecting loads of watering cans and watering like mad the mycelium, and then helping pump them up with some kind of straw, so they're kind of coming up out of the ground. So even on a very subconscious level, gnomes are mushrooms and mushrooms are gnomes. The two are very, very well connected. And it would have been perfectly reasonable for people pre-Christian times and post-Christian times who believed in earth spirits to give thanks to those beings that would give food within the darkest days. And it's not only the foods that the fly agaric gave, or the medicinal shamanic purposes, but also that colour. So you're in the middle of winter, everything's covered with snow. They're like jewels. They are
Mm.
just such a sight. And the other thing is, there is a topical research going off at the minute. There's a massive amount of research going off about mushrooms, which couldn't please me more. But there's a massive interest in looking at the relationships and the symbiotic relationships between different species mycelium networks. So if you are a mushroom forager, um, it's very much a mantra of where there's one, there's more. So you come across one species and you can almost guarantee that within a reasonable amount of steps away from that species that you will find another species that are living quite harmoniously. I mean, mycelia could talk about, that they battle, there's massive clashes and battles that go off. It's they're fascinating. It's fascinating, mycelia. So if you spot a fly agaric, is it then that indicates that there are winter chanterelle underneath the snow, or there is some kind of bolete that's nestled in moss near there? Are they indicator mushrooms that will so they become a joyous thing. If you're harvesting, you're very, very hungry, you want something different to put in the pot other than dried meat. I'm babbling on. You've got me on the mushroom subject. So anyway, yes, gnomes and mushrooms. I can understand why there's that beautiful connection. But why?
Although I think, sorry, Kate,
That's all right.
there's a specific connection with the gnomes and by correlation Santa with the fly agaric.
Yes.
Now you don't see 19th century images of gnomes with, say, psilocybin. Yeah. Well,
No, you
somebody
don't. You don't.
somebody will probably correct me for that, but there might be a few. But
Yeah, yeah.
now, if you're just talking about an altered state of consciousness brought upon by these particular fungi, why would you not be? Psilocybin. It's a much easier mushroom to use to alter your
Yes.
state of consciousness, which people in the past, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, they knew that was the most easily found mushroom.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas fly agaric, apart from you have to prepare it properly
Yes.
before you consume it, it's a bit hit and miss in terms of if you're looking for an altered state of consciousness that's absolutely guaranteed. It's problematic unless you really know what you're doing, such as the Evenki people in Siberia. They
Mm-hmm.
definitely knew what they were doing. And so it just interests me that it's specifically the fly agaric. I mean, partly it's because it's such a colourful fungi, whereas
Yes.
psilocybin is sort of, manky little brown thing. So there might be just that pictorial element of it just looks nice. But you will also notice many of these Christmas cards and images in the 19th century of gnomes with the fly agaric. They're often now in the card they're usually shown as being drunk.
Yes.
They'll have tankards in them, but I don't think it's a coincidence that those gnomes are off their head with some fly agaric mushrooms in the vicinity. That's even more speculative. But
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know, did the 19th century people who were drawing this, were they tapping into some deep tradition, or did they think, oh well, I've seen someone else draw that seems cute, I'll make this into a Christmas card. I don't know. There's definitely some element to
I
that.
I have something in the back of my brain, and I'm not brilliant at keeping dates or whatever, but I came across a piece of research a few days ago that was talking about mushrooms actually being used in beers and it was banned. And I think it was like the early 1800s, mid 1800s, something like that, where the use of mushrooms were banned from being put into beer. So, just in terms of things like absinthe, etc., and certain elements of absinthe being taken away and being banned because of their drug-inducing properties of them. I mean, maybe it was still quite well known that certain beers had mild psychedelic properties in them.
Yeah, I don't. I've never heard that about mushrooms being put into mixed with alcohol traditionally. As I just don't know anything about that. So,
Oh, they used to chuck
but
all sorts in. Honestly, it was a
that's true. And even if it were by accident,
mm,
all
no
right,
that
chop these mushrooms up. Don't know what they are. Chuck them in.
I will find I will find the research for that because it did fascinate me because I just thought I had always been under the assumption, and I will stand by this, that actually mushrooms, specifically fly agaric, in conjunction with alcohol, can do some real serious damage to your system because it inflames and flares up things like your livers and your kidney. But I suppose back then they didn't really care as long as they were having a good time, like the gnomes. So yeah, yeah, no, gnomes is it is a funny one, but like I said, I often see gnomes as elves, and they're interdispersible. But there's also that connection with um, Santa and diminutive, so they're little, they're often a lot smaller than Santa Claus, and we in my paranormal head, I'm always connecting that. Is that connection to do with then spirits of the dead, or is there
Mm.
some connection with Santa being helped by ancestors? And the way to explain them being small, etc., is all the elves. That's what it is. Because in a lot of cultures, spirits of the dead are seen diminished, aren't they? They're seen as smaller entities than their actual physical body.
That's right. And going back to Siberia again, the Evenki shamans in Siberia were, well, as most ancient cultures, were obsessed with the ancestors.
Yes.
And they had the tradition that the ancestors became increasingly smaller over
Yeah.
time. And one of the main reasons for shaman altering their state of consciousness through whatever means and was to go and visit the ancestors in order to gain wisdom to bring back. And then we come back to the gift that was given to the community.
Mm-hmm.
The shamans were giving the gift, and the gift was facilitated by them altering their state of consciousness by taking the fly agaric Amanita muscaria mushroom so that they could meet those ancestors. And so again, yeah, so there you go. Your very first question about the elves, the fairies, what they got to do with Christmas, maybe they are our ancestors.
Yeah, I mean,
And
definitely. We know.
so
Go on.
hold on.
Yeah.
The ancestors who can give us wisdom
Yeah.
and meaning and understanding by way of a gift.
Yes. Perfect. We've solved it. And the thing is, it is happening at the solstice, which is, the death of the year, and it's about rebirth and channeling. And we've got that period of suspension in between the solstice and sort of Christmas time. So we've got 3 or 4 days where the light is actually, we're properly suspended. I mean, we could talk about the liminality of it, etc., for weeks and weeks and weeks. But in that time, when you have the death of a season and the death of a year, it would be, I think, more in tune that those elves are the dead. We've cracked it. Let's go home. We've cracked it.
Yeah, what did I say? Is if anyone says they've got the answer to everything, don't
We
believe them.
haven't. No.
That may just be an aspect of it. It's as with anything, as soon as you start, sorry, but as with anything connected to the fairies and the long tradition and folklore that we can tap into, as soon as you start doing it, you realize this is far more complex than some any one person can get their head around. I mean, a lot of people have been divulging a lot of energy into trying to understand what the fairies are for a very long time.
Yeah.
And okay, so we've got a little bit further than we were 100 years ago, but there's a long way to go, which is good for channels like this because we can just keep on talking about them forevermore.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
coming.
coming out with all sorts of speculation and theories, and people can come in, and I realise we've taken up almost our entire podcast.
I know,
To,
talking about
to,
Santa.
wait, but just for viewers, before we came on, Kate and I were saying, right, we can talk about this, and we had about six or seven different topics, and we've only covered one.
Yeah, I know it always happens. It always happens. It's good to unpick it though.
Yeah,
So I think what I'd like to do is put out to people watching this about what their ideas and theories are about why the Fae are connected and what they're, culturally, people come from different backgrounds. Did you have a fairy on top of your Christmas tree? What are your ideas of elves? Are they more gnome-like or are they elf-like? What is your idea of Santa being a fairy and being part of that fey realm? Is that something that you buy into? Is that something that you definitely don't? If people have got any kind of points that they want to put across, I always say this, we always read all the comments. I'm definitely not particularly technically minded. Neil's a little bit more advanced on technology than me, but only just. I'm saying that on the quiet. So if we don't answer them, I think what we'll do in the new year is we will go through some of the comments and questions just randomly and just do a rundown of what people have been saying and maybe answer some questions. I think we're going to have a part two to this. I think if you keep your eyes peeled over the next couple of days, we will have a part two where we'll be looking at maybe the Christmas fairy. Maybe we'll get round to talking about the Christmas fairy on top of the Christmas tree. Maybe we'll
yeah.
event.
Okay, yeah, but I'm afraid I have a suspicion that that might be a little bit more modern. I can't see any connections. You can come up with your own theories on that. It would be good.
Okay.
What one thing we haven't had time to talk about today, but I think is very very important is we're talking about like paganism and Christianity and ancient cultures, and it would be very good to start looking at the remnants of our own, especially in the British Isles and Ireland,
Mm,
monuments,
yes.
which there's a close correlation between some of these monuments and their alignment and midwinter. That's not a coincidence.
No.
And so if you're talking about our ancient ancestors thinking that the midwinter solstice and what we now know as Christmas or Yule or however you want to term it, they put great credence and great store in the importance of that year. And just very briefly before we go, if anyone wants a little bit more information about that, go onto Facebook. Circle Stories is the name of the page by our friend and compatriot David Halpin, who's been on the show before, and he's been putting up some great posts
It
about it
has.
over the last month. So that's just a little heads up.
Yeah. Lovely. Right. So we will be back with another program shortly. It'll probably be me and Neil again chattering on, and we're hoping to get some guests lined up for the new year. But right now, thank you very much. Don't forget to subscribe and to like. Keep forgetting to say that. I should be like Erwin Saunders and have a little bell that can ring to remind me for you to do that. And it's much appreciated. We are very poor and we would like to be able to do longer programs than we're actually doing right now. So every little like and every little subscription really does help. So thank you very much. And we've run out of time. So we will see you really soon.
Thank you. See you, everyone.